So now I just want to briefly introduce Jane Jones, who will be taking us through the two panels today. She's kindly offered to moderate for us. Jane is the Commercial Manager for Argyll and Bute Council and National Chair of Assistem FM. And she will introduce our first panel members for us. So I'll stop sharing, Jane, and we'll get the panel organized. And I just want to say before we get started, please to everybody, if you've got any questions for the panel members, please pop them in the chat. Jane and I will both be keeping an eye on that, and we would love to have a bit of a discussion, but Jane's going to introduce our panel and get us started.
That's lovely. Thank you so much for that introduction, Chelsea. And yes, I plea this will be a much more rich discussion if we can get some questions, so your burning questions out, so that we can tackle some of the queries and issues you might have about universal free school meals and school meals in general. As Chelsea said, I'm Jane and I'm National Chair of Assist FM as well as Commercial Manager at Argyll and Bute Council. It is my privilege to be here today to take part in the session. School meals are, of course, one of the many tools in the box that help to contribute to ways of reducing the cost of living for many families. And it's uniquely placed to help improve access to nutritious, tasty and sustainable food for our children and young people. And as we continue to begin to emerge from the pandemic and face the spiralling cost of living that we're seeing at the moment, more children than ever before are benefiting from that universal free school meal provision, where access to food helps us to now protect dignity and choice for more children and young people than ever before. Now, we do continue to do this in ways that help create sustainable food systems, moving us closer to that ambition of delivering a good food nation through better use of local food to help improve other aspects like community wealth building and providing good quality work opportunities across the food and drink sector. So we're very much trying to think about beyond just the meal on the plate, and I'm sure my colleagues Chris and Nikki will be speaking about some of that during this morning's session. So without further ado, I'd ask Chris to just introduce yourself so everyone knows who you are.
Yes, good morning everyone. Also a pleasure to be here this morning. So my name's Chris Ross. I'm the Catering Operations Manager at the City Edinburgh Council and also the Vice Chair of Assist FM.
Thanks, Chris. And Nikki, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Nikki Joyner. I'm the Catering Coordinator at East Hampshire Council. I am also Chair of the catering arm of Assist under Hands On Hungry, and my network keeps coming up and saying it's unstable, so apologies if I disappear. So fingers crossed at the moment.
No worries, hopefully you can hang in there, Nikki.
I know.
Absolutely. So just to set the scene a wee bit, Chris, can you talk us through what the commitment is to universal free school meals at the moment, and why, or what your understanding is of why that's a priority for Scottish Government at the moment?
Yeah, of course, Jane. So the Universal Free School Meal Programme, really if we rewind back to January 2015 when we delivered 1 to 3 free school meals, we see the next expansion of that through Universal Free School Meals in 4 and 5s as a natural extension to that. So P4s we have delivered since August 2021. And P5s more recently in January 2022, and with all local authorities planning to deliver the remainder when we know a bit more about the situation. So we're all gearing up for a kind of universal provision across primary, special, and hopefully eventually high schools as well.
Great stuff. And do you have a thought around why the investment in school meals? Why have Scottish Government gone down the route of deciding that this is a good way to spend public money?
I think certainly for us and our authority, and probably more widely, Jane, you know, the health and well-being of our pupils and moving up through the school term, you know, we've seen it from 1 to 3s and the difference in the good habits that is instilled through the 1 to 3 feeding programme. We hope that this is just a natural extension of a way to provide a really good, high quality, nutritious lunch to pupils that hopefully that then extends beyond the school day, and they take those good habits with them throughout their lives.
Perfect, that's great. I think that does summarise exactly some of the drivers behind this. Nikki, it goes beyond just lunch though, and there are wider commitments around school food. Can you talk us through what some of those look like?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that school meals is not just about, as you say, the lunch commitment. Catering services are now viewed more like a welfare service. So we're looking after children's health and well-being where we can throughout the whole day. So many authorities offer a breakfast provision that is open to all children. Our East Hampshire does that. It's a free service to certain demographic within the authority, and it doesn't distinguish on your financial background. Any child can access. There's holiday club provision, which is, the models across Scotland vary widely, whether it's 365 days a year that the service is there, or whether it's just certain windows. But the models are there to make sure, again, that all the children, young people are well looked after and cared for, in as best as possible, to ensure they have access, as you said, Jane, to healthy and nutritious food. And I think you can see is having a positive outcome in a lot of the children, young people that have been accessing these programs for a long time. And we've had a lot of feedback from parents and council to say that the effect of children accessing breakfast has been huge, because they're ready and settled before they start learning for the day. So therefore that positive impact is on education as well as accessing food. So it's an all-round effect.
Thanks, Nikki. And of course, there's some more development in the wings as well. As there's, can you talk a little bit about the provision of free milk that we're about to see come in, and maybe touch on some of the support that's already in place for early years children?
So currently, all councils in Scotland provide a meal for I
think the gremlins have got Nikki, and her network has dropped. Chris, are you able to pick up on that?
Milk of children having access to this is now being deemed as positive. So
Nikki, we lost you a bit there.
Sorry. Sorry, my network is not very good here.
So are you able to do a quick recap?
Yeah, so the early years sector has been hugely successful, and we have such a lovely environment. Early years children just eat everything, and the result of that, and also the access to free milk and fruit, has been deemed as positive. So as a result, the Scottish Government is now pushing out, and we're looking into the investment of having an offering of free milk in primary school sector as well. So very early stages, and we're not quite sure how it's going to work, and how it will work in a positive way. Everything we do has to work successfully. There's no point in putting initiatives in that just look good on paper. The children have to engage in it as well. So that's something that I think is really critical, that we have to obviously look at the estate and what the facilities are within all the schools, and make sure that is fit for purpose to ensure we can deliver all initiatives.
Absolutely. So is there something in there, Nikki, about the dining environment, making sure that our children and young people enjoy their lunch? It's not just a matter of feeding them.
Very much so. I mean, nobody wants to go to a restaurant that is you're huckled out the door after 15 minutes and told that that's it, next child, and you put them sit down. So that's not an eating experience we want as adults. So why should we expect our children and young people to accept that as a way to enjoy their lunch? None of us experience our lunch in that way, so we have to make sure it's as nice and positive. So again, they engage and want to be there, because if the children and young people don't want to be there, they won't come. And it's really, really important that they do and they enjoy it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Nikki. Chris, can you tell us a wee bit about what you understand from speaking to pupils and parents in Edinburgh about how extending the school meals offer has helped children and families?
Yeah, of course, Jane. And I think probably to rewind and put into a little bit of context, through all the work that went across all local authorities through COVID to ensure that children in most need had access to free meal provision. And I think personally, and a lot of other local authorities were touched by the difference that those food parcels, or however we delivered food provision, actually made to those who were in most need. And I think through the expansion of the Universal Free School Meal Programme, hopefully we're able to reach more people. We were always in Edinburgh concerned about those who didn't quite make the bracket for free school meals. And they were getting lost in the system almost because they were just on the cusp, I suppose, of free school meal entitlement. And we personally have seen that it's been so welcomed across all our schools that there is now, there's no stigma. We removed that obviously through cashless catering, but everybody in that school, we've got some schools in Edinburgh where the uptake from 1 to 5s is around about 90%. So pretty much every pupil from 1 to 5 are enjoying that lunch together. Now that obviously poses some challenges as well, but I think it's been a welcome relief for parents across Edinburgh, and hopefully we can continue to build upon that momentum. I think you touched upon it really well, Jane. The current situation economically out there is continuing to become more and more volatile. So we see our service playing a bigger and bigger role in the lives of pupils across Edinburgh.
Absolutely. I think this is something that's becoming even more urgent and pressing, and we're keen to roll out to primary 6 and 7. We just need to overcome some of the operational challenges to get us there. So speaking about that, what have been some of the operational challenges with implementing these? Nikki, I'll maybe ask you to come in that first because I can see you're smiling.
Yes. Well, East Devonshire Council has 8% free school meal entitlement across the estate. So when the introduction of universal free school meals, that was going to generated a very large challenge for us because we have 3 or 4.
I'll just give Nikki a minute to see if she's able to come back.
4 primary schools with over outside the box, but also I know they've got 2 children in a school, and that's a massive problem in how to deliver that to ensure that it's fair and equitable for all pupils, because you can't deliver a different service depending on the facilities in school. It has to be fair and equitable across the board. So massive investment has been looked at and considered, and but also in a very cost-effective way, because at the end of the day, there's not an elastic budget for authorities, so we have to be clever and smart about how we deliver the service and think outside the box. And I think, speaking with a lot of colleagues throughout Scotland, we've all consulted with each other, pinched each other's ideas or shared each other's ideas to try and deliver the best solutions for children and young people to make sure that they all get access to lunches. But we still have some pressure points, and we're working on them, as everybody has. So and it's just, but at the end of the day, as long as the experience is good for the children, that's the main thing that matters.
Thanks, Nikki. Chris, Nikki said there we've been pinching each other's ideas and sharing that knowledge across local authorities. What has your approach been, and how have you felt where there are some schools that you could potentially just go ahead and roll this out to primary 6 and 7, but we're not able to do that from an equity point of view because we want to make sure that we are providing it to all children as soon as we possibly can? How are you able to use some of the ideas to make sure that we get there sooner, but also how have you been able to deal with the challenges of not doing this quickly enough?
I think it's been a difficult balancing act, and I think that's where Nikki hit the nail on the head. Having the network such as Assist, where we've got all local authorities sharing information, is a real help, because we'll sometimes kind of bang our head against a brick wall and say, how are we going to deliver this? For many years, one of our big bugbears is that schools are built. New schools, even to this day, are built with dining halls that can only really accommodate a third of the school roll. So the impact that has on the dining provision is huge, Jane. I think the other thing that we've been, I suppose, slightly concerned about is just to keep an eye on, is to make sure that those who are in most need, because of universal, aren't being disadvantaged. So we've got our pupils who are eligible for free school meals, those who are in most need, and we just need to make sure through delivering, in some schools, potentially double the numbers that we were previously delivering, that those pupils who are in most need are still getting access to this vital facility. But I think idea sharing, certainly, we've looked at different methods of delivery. we're also looking at, for example, in the upper school, in primary school, P6 and P7, is their lunch, could we tweak their lunch to be a bit closer to our high school offering, to free up a bit more space in the dining hall? So I think all these things, you know, through Hands on Hungry, are allowing local authorities to be flexible in the way that they are approaching the delivery of free school meals.
Thanks, Chris. I see there's some questions in the chat, which I'll come on to just in a second. Nikki, just to maybe build on something that Chris had said there, do you share Chris's concern that there's a possibility of some of our more vulnerable children becoming lost in universal provision? How do we make sure that it doesn't happen?
Well, as I said, we have a very small entitlement of free school meals. So as children, and as a result, we feel we have an essential need to look after these children, as every authority does, but because we've got so few, it's probably slightly easier for us to manage. So the only way we do it is to identify the children using clothing grant, and then we our SMID 1 to 3, and the head teacher, we then do a manual exercise in every school periodically just to confirm they are using the service. If it's found or not, then we will have a conversation. And often we found it's something simple as all the friends go for a packed lunch, and they don't want to come to sit with the school dinner children. So we've bought packed lunches and made the school dinner in a packed lunch box and put it out for the child so that they can then sit with their peers and not as a.
Yeah, so I think it's very much about using that dignity element, but doing it in a way that protects that, but allows them to have that.
All about being able to ensure that they don't.
Yeah.
They,
Nikki, we lost you at the end there, but I think we got the gist of it. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Question in the chat from Karen. Karen is asking, she's interested in knowing how food education can be linked to programme around school meals to encourage uptake. Nikki, do you want to talk about that, how we work across the school day?
Yeah, we in East End we're part of education, so there's no debate about whether we go into schools and help. If a school asks us to help to deliver food classes, we do, and not so much during the pandemic, but post-pandemic we used to regularly go in and support teachers in delivering classes. And it could be simple things like making pizzas, but we also had some children in the senior section into the kitchen. So if they're doing it as part of their learning, we will have them in for a couple of weeks to work in the kitchen, so they get an experience of the commercial situation to see if that's a career path they want to go down. And then primary school, it's about educating on life skills that they can take forward into adulthood, because at the end of the day, learning to make a pot of soup is the most fantastic thing in the world, because you can use that up until any age, and it's a very simple task, but it gives a really access to a nutritious, quick meal. So these sort of simple things, but it's developing throughout the year group. So some of our schools run a culinary skills class, and they have kitchens in primary school, and we get involved as much as possible. But that is because often it's because we're part of education, so that door is very wide open for us. And I will say that a lot of councils in Scotland don't have that door so wide open, so it's not a level playing field for authorities to access catering services necessarily. And Chris is nodding his head there.
That's a really, really fair point, Nikki, and hopefully I think that may be something we can come back to in the discussion groups, because that, I think, there's a gap there that we could be maximising to better increase uptake by creating more opportunities for that cross-sectoral learning. Laura, I know you have a question in the chat, and you've also got a couple of points that you've made. Would you like to come off mute and ask your question and maybe make some of those points?
Yeah, happy to. I think it was really interesting to hear, Nikki, about the work that you're doing across the local authorities about sharing best practice. And I think I popped a question there that was just about if there is any sort of materials or case studies that you sort of pulled together amongst yourself about what that good practice looks like. It would be, excellent to see that. And I think it would give us all some ideas that we could, use in different realms of our work. So that was my first question. And then I've just made a couple of comments about the points that Chris mentioned about universal versus targeted, and sort of making sure that the children that are most in need or that benefit most from funding the funding and the services aren't lost. And where I work in Scottish Government, and I think somebody had asked a question further up as well about holiday clubs and the holiday space throughout the year, which is also really important, that we don't have that drop off during the holiday periods. And we're working on developing those schemes now, and obviously food plays a huge part in that. And it's early days, and we've got a lot of sort of groups set up, which Jane is part of, for us to explore this further. But I am just very, very keen to understand more about the sort of targeted provision, which in our space is going to be the way that it goes. It's not going to, we've not got enough funding to be universal, and I suppose it's just being really, really sensitive to that, about making sure that you're not increasing the stigma and inadvertently reducing uptake, I suppose.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I'll let Nikki come in about holiday provision in a minute, because she's probably more experienced in terms of the long-term input and the different approaches to that. Chris, do you want to touch on Laura's question about sharing best practice and how we do that?
Yeah, of course, and I actually think, Jane, it's through things like this, and it's certainly something that we've been keen to get involved in as many sessions such as this over the last couple of years. Really, the pandemic for us has been a good way to reach a wider audience. We've been invited to more events such as these, and it's amazing through doing a couple of these now, the amount of people that you'll get an email afterwards and say, God, I never knew that the school meal service did that, or I never knew that that was part of a local authority duty. And I think it's our job as local authority caterers and service providers to probably shout about what we do a bit more, and to share the best practice a bit more. And events like these probably are one of the key ways to get that message across, because every local authority will have some really good examples of great work that goes on across their authority. We just don't tell anybody we do it. And that's something that we certainly need to get a lot better of doing.
Absolutely, we're doers rather than talkers sometimes, and that can be to our disadvantage. Nikki, do you want to talk a little bit about holiday programmes and how some of that is done at the moment?
Yeah, no problem. I'm going to show my age here. We've been running a holiday programme in the East Hampshire Council for about 17 years. And basically it is an all-day programme, and children and young people come in and access activities, and then they get a lunch provision. However, about 8 years ago, we included a cooking class as part of that holiday provision, and 10 of the pupils who attend the holiday programme actually cook the lunch for the other children that attend the programme. As I've explained, we're small free school meal entitlement in the state, so we have about 120 children a day at 2 different sites. So to make sure that we are targeting the correct demographic, first and foremost, the programme is the head teachers in schools contact the relevant parents to give free access to pupils who are entitled, and they register in the summer, whatever, it's up to the parents how long their child attends. And then once that has been saturated, well, not saturated, but once we know all people who wish to access, then they open the programme up to parents to pay. So therefore it doesn't become a stigmatised programme, because it's got a mix of eligible pupils and paying pupils, but we make sure we target the eligible pupils first, which is really important. And it's nice because when the children cook the lunch, they take ownership for it, and they'll sit down and go, I made that macaroni cheese, with their table, because they sit in a family service and eat it all together. So it just creates a really nice environment, and it's our pupils come time and time again because we get to know them and know their faces, because I come in at lunchtime and go visit, and it's the same children appear year on year. And we've even had pupils who have attended the programme for 10 years, and then when they finish primary school, they come along as helpers, because they can then still access food, but also one of the girls told us that she was paying back what she got, which I think we felt like crying about, but never mind. So that's how our holiday programme runs.
That's lovely to hear, Nikki, and it's lovely when you get positive feedback like that. Makes all the difference. Chris, I'm conscious that we've spoken quite a lot today about primary provision, and obviously the universal provision element is where our focus is in primary schools at the moment, but hunger and cost of living crisis obviously impacts on all age groups beyond primary school. Hunger doesn't stop at 11 years old. We have just had some survey results that we conducted with the Scottish Poverty and Inequality Research Unit last week, where we offered every secondary school pupil in Scotland the opportunity to tell us about their experience around school food. Can you talk a little bit about what that tells us about school food and cost of living for secondary schools and what we may potentially be looking at next?
Yeah, Jane, I think secondary school provision probably in Edinburgh slightly concerns us more than primary school provision, because in primary school, in a way, we've got a captive audience. And so stigma, etc., is reduced. In high school, what we see is very low uptakes in a lot of our high schools. Now that can be through kind of a combination of reasons. Certain legislation that we have in place for our high schools does restrict the products that we can offer, and that sometimes makes local authorities' job slightly more complicated, because we're competing with the high street, and sometimes we can't deliver what the high street is offering. So it concerns us when we've got pupils who are entitled to free school meals in secondary schools who aren't taking it, simply because they don't want to be left behind. All their friends are going out to wherever, Greg's, etc., and they don't want to be left behind. And that's certainly a concern for us. So I know there is muted talks about extending universal provision into secondary schools, and I think that is a natural next step. Local authorities have worked really hard over the last couple of years to look at what we offer secondary school pupils, to try and make it as close and as relevant to the high street as possible. We're never going to match it 100%, but there's been a lot of good work in there, and we need some intervention to help pupils stay in and use the facilities that we've got.
Thanks, Chris. And of course, just as we are reaching the end of our panel discussion, the questions are coming in thick and fast, and the conversation could continue all morning, and I would happily chair that, I can assure you. But maybe we can take some of the questions in the chat into the discussion groups as well, because I think they will lead nicely to some of the questions that we're looking around there. But there is one there that a couple of people have shown a bit of interest in, and Emily, it's your question about how we procure school meals and how we work with small-scale local producers. I think that's certainly part of our ambition for Scottish Food and Good Food Nation, and how our case for good school food links up. Chris, can you touch on that very briefly and explain some of the good work that's already underway and some of the learning that we are trying to share more broadly around that?
Yeah, definitely, and it goes back to perception. I think even, when we ask a lot of parents, or even still in Edinburgh, and we do try to communicate that, I think they still think that everything arrives in the back of one van and we just unthaw it and serve it to pupils. In actual fact, pretty much every local authority is using a local greengrocer, a local dairy, a local butcher, and we've done a lot of work over, all local authorities have done a lot of work to balance the need for large scale quantity. In schools, we have very specific requirements for products, and some local producers that we would like to use aren't quite there yet to supply the volume and to supply the specification that we need. However, that's through working with Scotland Excel, who are our procurement partners, to try and bring some of these small scale producers into some of our larger frameworks as almost like a secondary supplier. So when we look at local fish, for example, Scotland Excel have introduced them into a tender with our wider supplier to ensure that they couldn't reach all 32 local authorities on their own. However, through our larger national supplier, they're able to get these products into schools. So there's still a lot of work to be done. However, there's a lot of good work already going on.
Absolutely, and I think the Good Food Nation bill will give us even more scope and opportunity to do some of that. Well, thank you to Chris and Nikki. Really appreciated your time today, and I think we have kick-started some of that conversation, and it's great to see some of those questions continuing in the chat. So I'll hand back to the Nourish team, and I'm looking forward to digging into some of this in the discussion groups.
Thank you so much, Jane, Nikki, Rich, Chris. Very rich discussion today. So now we're going to have yes, the opportunity, as we said at the start, to have a small discussion with a small group in our breakout rooms. So if you, the question that we're going to have, but also, you know, taking into consideration all these questions that started listing in the chat, but I would like you to think, what can schools and local authorities do to encourage more children and families to enjoy and take up the school meals offer? Listening to Nikki was just quite exciting that, you know, people are thinking outside the boxes and are thinking how children, not, you know, it's not just a plate of food, but it's how children will want to have that meal, how children will enjoy having lunch among their peers. So just think, there's just so much to think in terms of, you know, free school meals. So Diana, I think, is going to press the button to take us back to not the Thank you, everyone. I hope you had good discussions in your breakout rooms. We're going to be getting into Mentimeter again. So you can share your reflections. I'm going to share it. If you go back to the Mentimeter, that'll be great. That's it.
Sorry, I came out my own group.
So would you like to share, you know, what are you taking away from the panel discussions or anything pending while you were having a chat in your breakout room?
Oh, I'm away.
I'll leave a couple of minutes for people to share. That I need to encourage my own child to cook more. Lots of ideas about how I can proactively work with parents more to encourage uptake. Expose children to different foods, many and various aspects to consider. More education is required for teaching staff. Lots of good things going on the Scottish school meals, and there isn't an understanding in the wider community about how much is already being done. Importance of real life environment for children's meals, real cutlery, real plates rather than sectorial, eating together to help children to feel comfortable and relaxed. Opportunity to use cooking sessions to encourage healthy eating by children and families. It's been very inspiring to see the amount of thought and work that has gone into school meals and ensuring that dignity and choice are at the heart of them. It's no longer like it or lump it for sure. Free school meals program is up against the marketing and advertising. Part of major corporations. It's hard to compete. Thank you so much for all your thoughts.